Hi guys, it's Max here from Bould Brothers. We've had loads of requests from you guys asking us to do a little class on how we brew coffee at home, or more importantly, how you can brew better coffee at home. For those of you that follow us on our Instagram, you might have noticed that I wrote a blog about 2 weeks ago showing you how we're brewing coffee at home at the moment. We're actually using a little device, I'm not sure if you've seen one of these before. This is made by OXO. It's called the OXO Good Grips Coffee Dripper. And it's a fantastic little piece of kit. So the idea for us brewing coffee at home is pretty simple. We want it to taste delicious, but we want it to be easy. There's so many steps involved in brewing a load of different hand brew coffee methods. This thing is super easy. Obviously, you make some sacrifices when you brew something like this. It's not 100% controllable by you, and some people love that. Do we love that at home? Honestly, we don't. When we're trying to brew coffee to the absolute best it can be in our shops, of course we take tiny little steps to make things perfect. But this thing makes a delicious brew, and it's so easy. For today, however, we're not talking about this. This is great, grab one if you fancy. We are talking about the good old-fashioned French press. I'm going to show you how we make a French press at Bould Brothers, how we suggest you make a French press at home. Is it as simple as whacking your coffee in, whacking some water in, waiting the popular 6 minutes or 4 minutes, and then pushing the plunger to the bottom and serving? It's not that simple if you want to get the most out of it, and I'm going to show you a few tips, tricks, techniques that are going to help you get the most out of your French press. So the first thing you're going to need is a French press. It could be any kind of French press, like this one, glass, it could be metal, it could be insulated, it could be plastic. It doesn't really matter. Pick one that you like to use, pick one you like to have on your table with you at breakfast. Next, you're going to need a second brewing pot. So this is just a teapot that we have. Doesn't need to be anything fancy. It can be, as long as it can hold liquid, you're all good. Now we're getting on to the important stuff, coffee. There are two things that are going to make your brew taste good in this. One of them is the coffee, the other is the water. The technique for a French press is not as important as those two things. So the coffee I've got today is our house coffee. It's a Burundi washed coffee. So it's the Bould Brothers house. You can buy it as whole beans and grind it yourself. That's probably the best way to get the aroma, the full taste and flavor experience that you're looking for. But you can grind the coffee beforehand. Buy it from a really good roaster. Ask them to grind it and ship it over to you. We'll do that for you on our website. It doesn't really matter too much. So how much coffee do you need to use? We recommend a recipe of 60 to 70 grams per litre. This is pretty standard when you're brewing coffee. It's important to have a weight amount of coffee in relation to water. It just means that you can develop your own personal recipe and it's repeatable. A technical thing. We're brewing in a French press, and this is what's called an immersion brew. So you can have some kind of drip brew like we talked about earlier with the OXO, and what that means is that you have coffee sitting in a basket, you pour water over, and the water filters through the coffee and takes some flavor with it into the cup. An immersion brew is different. As the name suggests, it all sits in a pot together, the coffee and the water, for a period of time, and then typically you'll pour the coffee out through a filter of some description. The difficulty with an immersion brew is that because we don't have water constantly passing over the coffee bed, you get left with a slightly less strong brew in comparison to a pour over coffee using the same amount. So for an immersion brew, you need to use about 15% more coffee to get the same strength. When you're brewing coffee, the first part of coffee that appears in your cup is the strongest. What that means is that for a drip technique, you add your water, which starts extracting, and then you add more water, and that water washes off the strong water straight into the cup. With an immersion brew, This isn't technically correct, but you add all of your water at once and the coffee holds on to a mixture of strengths of liquid. The next thing you're going to need is some scales. You don't have to brew with scales, you can use a volumetric, so you can say, I'm going to use 3 scoops of coffee, fill my cafetiere up to the line, and just make sure you repeat that process every time. The difficulty with that is that if you've got a recipe of 60 grams per litre, you can't know how many grams you've got of coffee or water if you don't have scales. You could really do with a timer. Not absolutely necessary in the sense that you could count out as many minutes in seconds as you like. We would suggest getting a timer. So the last thing you're going to need is a kettle. It absolutely does not need to be a swan neck kettle like this. Bog standard kettle will do you perfectly. In fact, I would suggest using a regular kitchen kettle, as typically they boil water faster and they make less noise than this. The only reason I'm using this for this demonstration is because we don't actually have a regular kettle in the shop. Now, what goes into the kettle is super important. This is not a very sexy thing to say, but the water that you use to brew your coffee is vital. I would say, this is a slight overestimation, but 50% of how good your coffee tastes is going to be up to the coffee, maybe 60%, and 40% is down to that water. If you use soft filtered water, that's pretty good. Does it taste nice to drink normally? If it does, you can probably brew a decent cup of coffee with it. But if you want to get acidic, sweet flavors from your coffee, so if you buy something from Kenya, for example, and it's got blueberries in the tasting notes, if it's one of those SL28 varieties, it's delicious, but you're not going to get any blueberry flavor if you don't do some proper water science. So let's get really geeky for a second. This is how Alex and I make water at home. Yeah, make. We use one of these things. Can you see that? Let's just let the camera focus. So what we do with this is we buy or make totally pure water, deionized water, for example. You can buy it in 5 litre, 10 litre jugs, or you can make it yourself. There's a company called Zero Water, can you see? They make a water filter that pretty well removes everything from your water. So it's like a Brita filter, except it does a more extreme job. It takes everything out of the water. The idea then is that you can add a sachet of this to 4.5 litres of pure water, and it gives you perfect water for brewing coffee. Perfect is a difficult term because there is an element of taste involved, so this gives you a fairly robust cup with a good amount of sweetness and not too much acidity. But it's so repeatable and so delicious that if you haven't tried it, you really, really should. Okay, so here's a little trick to work out how big your cafetiere is. How many mils does it hold? Pop your cafetiere on your scales, if you've got them. Tare them, that just means 0. And then fill up to the point that you want to brew to with water from the tap. However many grams are showing on the scales, that's how many mils your cafetiere holds. Okay, so that is 950 grams. This is a litre, because if we filled that up to the top, that would be roughly 50 more grams of water, maybe a touch more. So this is showing 950 grams, so that's how many mils of water is in that cafetiere right now. Let's get to the technique. I did actually record some info live for you, but I realised when watching this tape back that we missed out some key elements, so I need to get all the info. Okay, so the first job is to get your French press on the scales. Tare the scales, and then add your coffee. I'm aiming for a recipe of 46 grams to 730 grams of water. So add your coffee, check the weight is correct, tare the scales again, and add your brew water. As soon as your kettle has boiled, you want to add the water straight away. We're aiming to brew our coffee at around 94 degrees, and by the time the water has left the kettle, travelled through the air and hit your coffee, it'll be close to that temperature. When adding your water, take care to saturate all of the grounds as quickly as possible. You want all of the coffee to become wet at the same time so that it extracts for an equal amount of time. This will drastically improve the evenness of your extraction. The next step is to give the coffee a good stir. This will ensure that any grounds that aren't completely wet already will start extracting. Grab your timer, set it to 2 minutes, and press start. It's important to say that I've ground my coffee fresh, and I'm using what I would describe as a medium grind size. Typically, French press would be brewed using a coarse grind, but for our recipe, we want to use a medium grind size, similar to the grind you might use for a V60 or Chemex. The reason for that is that we want to be brewing the coffee for a little less time, so we need to compensate for a shorter brew time by making our grind a little finer. Okay, that's perfect. Our 2 minutes are up. So now what we're going to do is take our cafetiere off the scales, insert our plunger and gently press down. You'll be familiar with the feeling of fighting to push down a cafetiere plunger. It's important actually to feel the opposite. There shouldn't be any resistance at all. If there is, it's likely your grind was too fine, something you'll be able to confirm in about a minute when we taste. From there, grab your secondary vessel, in our case a stainless steel teapot shaped like a flatfish, and gently decant the contents of your French press into pot number 2. It's true that some recipes call for you to leave the coffee in the cafetiere for a further 5 to 10 minutes. This is predominantly to let the sediment settle at the bottom so that you don't get it in your cup. Our theory on this is simple. If you're brewing with a French press, or pretty much any immersion brew with press in its name, then you like a little sediment. It's a different, unique characteristic of these kinds of techniques, so we like to celebrate that. If you're not a fan, a much faster and more effective way of removing sediment is to pass the brew through a filter paper as you strain it into your second vessel. The choice, it's yours. Up to you. This coffee is delicious. Whew. Woo! Yeah! That's getting me going, let me tell you. Wow. As you can see, it's not the simplest French press technique in the world, but it certainly isn't the most complicated, and it's fairly quick. The really good things, as I mentioned before, is you can make lots of coffee all at one time. It's fairly foolproof in the sense that you don't need any particular technique or skill to be able to do this. All you need is great water, great coffee, and a little bit of time. So there you have it, our way of brewing French press coffee at home. Hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you guys so much for watching. Stay safe. We are so looking forward to getting you all back into the shops again, serving some delicious coffees and having some conversations with you.